both of you. Thank you. A little update on our air and water quality, need for improvement. Let's turn our attention to those who are most impacted by poor weather and poor air, the poor. We have our environmental justice and local outreach consideration. Phoebe Seaton is a co-director and leadership council for justice and accountability. Good morning. And Tapan Pathak is the cooperative extension specialist with here at University of California, Merced with the Sierra Nevada Research Institute. Thank you guys for taking time out and participating on our climate adaptation search. Who would like to go first? It doesn't matter.
I'll go first.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for holding this very important informational hearing, and welcome to UC Merced. My name is Tapan Pathak. I'm a cooperative extension specialist with specializing in climate adaptation in agriculture. I have a statewide appointment, and I'm housed here in Sierra Nevada Research Institute within UC Merced. I'm one of the first 2 cooperative extension specialists who are housed here at UC Merced. So, and I started my position this year, so I'm relatively new in this position, but I'm very excited. And I'm honored to give this testimony about cooperative extension's effort in climate adaptation. Central Valley, as we know, is one of the most productive agricultural regions around the world. It has a very unique Mediterranean climate, and that's very suitable for agriculture. And that's the reason why we grow so many crops in this region. And as we know that climate has direct influence in agriculture, with the changes we have seen in the past and projected changes for future climate, poses many challenges for agriculture. Increased temperatures, both minimum and maximum, reduced number of winter chill hours, which is important for many specialty crops, decreased winter snowpack, earlier timing of snow melt, and vulnerability to pests and diseases are some of the most documented impacts that we have seen in many reports, including CDFA and other regional reports on climate change impacts in agriculture. So well-coordinated research and extension or outreach efforts are very important, especially in addressing this issue and making agriculture more resilient to climate. So within University of California Division of Ag and Natural Resources, that is we call UCANR, is conducting a wide array of research and extension efforts, especially in this area. Just to provide a brief synopsis about UCANR, UCANR is a statewide network of University of California researchers and educators dedicated for creating, development, and application of knowledge in ag natural resource and human resources. ANR's advisors, specialists, and faculty bring practical science-based answers to Californians. Excuse me. ANR has 200 locally based cooperative extension advisors and specialists and 130 campus-based extension specialists across 4 universities, including UC Merced, and 57 local offices throughout California, and 9 research and extension centers, which does a lot of applied research, especially in many areas, including adaptation. I would like to highlight some of the climate adaptation efforts that we have started at UCANR and some of the ongoing effort that has been done within the institute. So one example is, as you know, U.S. Department of Agriculture established this climate hubs around the nation. There are, I think, 7 such hubs, and the main mission for this climate hubs is to deliver science-based practical information and program support to agricultural community to support climate-informed decision-making in light of increased risk and vulnerability associated with the changing climate. And including the 7 hubs which are located at different regions, there are 3 sub-hubs, and one of the sub-hubs is in California. So California has their own climate sub-hub. So UCANR is one of the key partners in this important effort, and serves on the sub-hub committee as well as Southwest Regional Climate Sub-Hub team, and then is actively engaged in many regional and local efforts. For example, one effort that we are just getting started is that UCANR, California Sub-Hub, and UC Berkeley is collaborating on a one-year project. It's a student project, but the topic is very important that I wanted to mention here is, so we are starting this project to identify climate information needs of almond growers in Central Valley, and utilizing these responses, what information they would like to see, and what are the impacts they have seen, and how they would like this information be delivered to them, and then using them to bridge gaps between climate model outputs and farmer decision making. So how we can better use some of the climate information we have and put them in a decision support perspectives for them to make climate-based or climate-smart decisions, especially for, and we are starting with almond, but we want to increase to different commodities and see.
So you're distinguishing between weather and climate. I mean, I get that everybody wants to know more about weather, but you're saying climate, which is more long-term, is saying this latitude that you're at, given the change of the increase in temperature, given the pest migration, this may not be an almond area, right?
Exactly. And so, yeah, so that, I mean, the decisions farmers make based on weather is usually very short term, when to fertilize, when to irrigate, and that's, so when we want to include climate so that it's incorporated into their longer term decision making process.
Now, could that work conversely? Because I've actually been to almond groves, and I know that often you buy a peach orchard or an apricot orchard that's lost its useful life, you graft, and then you create almond trees, because an almond tree is like a palm tree if you just grew it from the seed. So is the thinking that, again, I tend to say go south because you have warmer weather, is the migration may be that you're going into apple orchards, or I don't know if you can do it with the rootstock, but is that the type of climate information?
And that could be, I mean, that's based on what type of responses we get, and then using that information and doing a vulnerability assessment of if you think in a longer term, and if you want to sustain in that environment, maybe there are certain adaptation that might have to be considered for future sustainability. And so, just to give you an example, there was a talk when I did a workshop, and there was a farm advisor who gave a talk on wine grape production in this region, and based on the temperature shifts that we are seeing, it might not be sustainable to go with the same variety they have been growing, but there are certain varieties which can sustain a 1 or 2 degrees temperature. So that kind of decisions that they might consider based on the climate information, just to give you an example.
Right, because the grapevines don't last forever, and at some time when they have to replace them, that would be data.
Right,
Go
exactly.
ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, as I mentioned in this project, one of the leading recommendations that we found in CDFA report on climate change for specialty crop was that the grower compile a list of grower needs for weather data and forecasts. So we hope to provide this kind of information for a lot of adaptation efforts for future. Another example is that we are starting climate change adaptation program team within the UC ANR system. And that program team will not only be consisting of UC ANR or UC academics, but also local, federal, and state level entities with the main idea is to come up with the priorities and act on what are the main priorities in this region, both in terms of research and extension. And it will also, this program team will also serve the purpose, as Roger Bales mentioned, that we need to have a more climate literate community. And so we want to build a capacity within the UC ANR to address climate change and agriculture and natural resources. And so we want to provide more science-based information to UC ANR academics who work directly with the farmers and other local entities, and so that they are better equipped with answering these questions when they're dealing with their clientele. So, and I'm serving as a chair for that program team. We are just getting started, and we have our first meeting next month, and we hope to continue this dialogue and identify both long-term and long-term and short-term priorities, and then execute some of the projects. Apart from this recent initiatives, UC Cooperative Extension is also actively engaged in informational response to climate risks. As we know, we are in exceptional drought conditions. So to help farmers make best use of water they have available, UCNR created drought fact sheets for many crops. And these peer-reviewed fact sheets provide practical strategies for making best use of available water. And I have the link that I'll provide in my written testimony. And not only that, we also have applied research webinar recorded, and it's available on the website for mainly for farmers to understand and use some of these practical tips that they are given in terms of saving the water and making more production with less water. Another example of high impact program where UC Cooperative Extension is leading, these two programs are Master Gardener and Master Naturalist. These are community education type programs, and then this is statewide. Almost many counties do offer these programs, and we include climate change and drought landscape type topics in their curriculum. And then once they learn in this program, they go out and teach others in community in what they learn in the class. Talking about communication, one of the most important components for effective adaptation is also effective communication about and translating science into decision making. Here at UC Merced, we have Center for Climate Communication, and that's affiliated also with the Sierra Nevada Research Institute. The main mission is to conduct and promote research on communicating climate issues, including climate variability and adaptation. Center organized a series of workshops on communicating climate issues in ag and water sectors in the past few years, and has planned a couple of more workshops in next coming few years. In this workshop, we invited diverse group of clientele, farmers, irrigation district, cooperative extension, local and state agencies, and also private ag industry people to participate. And main approach was to have climate communication be integral part of that workshop, and make it more interactive and facilitate two-way communication for increased co-learning and more dialogues with the audience. And feedback we received from this workshop is that climate communication is definitely one of the most important aspects, and then should be continued in future. And so they emphasized a lot on climate communication. So I think with that, I'll conclude my testimony. And
I was wondering, one of the things that I'm concerned with is that communication between the federal government, the state government, the UCs or the academia, and then local governments. And it seems like you have a nice communication or a model with the farmers, because this is their livelihood, right?
Sure.
We have, are there some tips that you could, I mean, they've got some skin in the game. They're either out of business or they're in business. So they're here and you're academia, so they want all the best tricks that you have. When I'm dealing with local governments, I don't have to leave Merced County, and you get a diversity of opinions in which way they want the train to go. I guess I'm wondering out loud, when you talk to a farmer or you provide data and they say, that climate change stuff, that's hocus pocus, that's not real. How do you respond at these seminars or these outreaches to improve outreach?
Sure. This is a very, very important and challenging question. Especially before coming here, I was in Nebraska in cooperative extension for almost 3-4 years, and we did a lot of survey and focus groups and that kind of work. And what we found, I was involved in one of the NSF projects on effective strategies for climate communications, and we interviewed farmers, then formal K-12 educators, and general community members and others. And what we found is there is not a clear one-way communication strategy that works for everybody. So for example, for farmers, if you talk about 1 or 2 degrees changes, that might not resonate very well with them. But how that 1 or 2 degrees changes would translate into their decision making and ultimately their economic return is more important to them. For formal educators or teachers, they want more science-based information. So I think it's important to customize this climate change communication toolbox with respect to different communities. And as with the USDA Climate Sub-Hub with California, we are also trying to work with Forest Services and others to do this capacity building jointly with them to get also NRCS on board and USDA and others on board as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Let's turn to our last presenter, Ms. Seaton. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And thank you.
No, thank you. First off, thank you to the committee for being here, for doing these throughout the state, and especially for being in the San Joaquin Valley. I have very blurry printouts of something that you're most likely familiar with, which folks have been talking about a lot today. It's CalEnviroscreen. It's a kind of an image that highlights the vulnerability of this region with respect to a lot of the issues that we've talked about today related to climate change, income status, language status, isolation from decision making, and and air quality, water quality and reliability, et cetera. And I think this map just highlights that we really are at, as we say, ground zero of climate effort and climate change, and the need to do it right. I'm going to talk about 3 things briefly. And just for those of you who aren't familiar with this, and I guess those watching these, the redder the region, the more vulnerable it's considered based on a set of demographic and environmental factors. So population age, income, education level, asthma rates, low birth weights, different types of air quality considerations, water quality considerations, et cetera, et cetera. But it's 19 metrics that look at vulnerability. And for those of you familiar with SB 535, directing climate investments, this is the map. These are the metrics that the state uses to prioritize investments. So I want to talk about three things briefly. First off, I want to make sure there's time. My coworkers who lead our climate efforts are here, so they might want to say a couple things that I leave out, along with residents that we're working with in a San Joaquin Valley-based resident-led climate network.
We'll have the public comment after our panels.
So we're working with, like, mostly in the Fresno to the Merced to Kern area, and really focus on Fresno and Kern right now on looking at climate change, mitigation, adaptation, and social cohesion efforts to both address and adapt to climate change. Broad areas that we're focused on are social cohesion and addressing sort of the root vulnerabilities, which I think others have mentioned are poverty and isolation. So we're working with community residents from several communities, bringing people together, developing this climate literacy, which we were quite, frankly, very surprised that kind of resident leaders from throughout the San Joaquin Valley are extraordinarily climate literate and are feeling the impacts every day through increased asthma rates, through increased heat, through increased vulnerability to heat, through decreased access to work because of less agricultural work, et cetera. And so there's also there's already a significant amount of literacy on these issues at the local level. We also see this as a fantastic opportunity to address climate action, as an opportunity to address poverty through both investments in workforce development and also investments in economic security through affordable housing, affordable energy, affordable transit, and other mechanisms to reinforce those supports. In terms of discrete areas that we focused on, we're focusing on water reliability and quality. To address that, we're looking at land use and better land use planning to prioritize investment in those existing communities that are currently supporting our agricultural economy and other economy, and also looking at how to make better use of our water infrastructure through more collaborative work among cities, trying to reduce the 7,300 public water systems that currently exist in the state to both address the reliability and create more efficient systems. So looking at consolidations and extensions of water service, especially to those most vulnerable communities, for example, residents on domestic wells and shallow wells who are, currently, as several folks know, running out of water, quite simply running out of water, and trying to reinforce resources for emergency water delivery. In terms of air and air quality, the importance of looking at addressing criteria air pollutants while we're addressing climate pollutants is critical. We know that the rising temperatures is going to exacerbate air pollution, exacerbate those asthma impacts and other health impacts of air quality. So really focusing on criteria. Air pollutants, while we're looking at climate change, we think is necessary to all climate action, to all efforts to address climate pollutants. We also, and Mr. Jordan mentioned the alert system at schools, where I think some of the residents who are here are going to discuss this, but it's really important that those alert systems are in place, are current, are active, not just during fire season, but at all times to protect students from air quality concerns that we see are getting worse and will get worse in time. And then in terms of heat, would like to address increased heat, I think, through a mechanism that will both address social cohesion concerns and the heat concerns, which is focusing especially in smaller communities on cooling centers that can also serve as emergency response centers and community centers. So we see a lot of many residents are reliant on swamp coolers that simply do not work at a certain temperature, can't afford the energy costs of cooling, and are growing more reliant on community cooling centers. And so seeing those investments in communities and schools that can serve these dual purposes. One thing that I didn't plan on talking about, but it occurred to us throughout this presentation, is the importance of assessing the impact of statewide adaptation and mitigation efforts on these most vulnerable communities. So one of the things that we've seen in this first round of intentional climate investments is that there are several projects that are globally good, but potentially detrimental to the community in which they're located. Some of the waste diversion projects, some of the anything that relies on significant transport, even of the woody materials, through communities that we're seeing that there's increased truck traffic and there isn't sufficient consideration of those impacts on local communities. And so what we would like to see, and I'd say more and more consideration that these vulnerable communities always be assessed when these projects are considered, and that these co-benefits play a more prominent role in the state's efforts to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And that is it.
No, thank you. You bring up, how to prioritize the state's efforts, because again, the adaptation and resiliency programs are, up to now with AB 32, there had to be the co-benefits. You couldn't just have adaptation programs or adaptation policy because you can't get any money for it, right? You have to have the co-benefits. So the dairy indication or situation has that co-benefit. We're trying to move to the next stage where we have we're coordinating policies because of the changes that are going to occur. Even if we cut off all the greenhouse gases tomorrow, we're still going to have worsening air quality, drought, extreme weather. There's part of the genie's already out of the bottle. How bad that gets and how extreme it gets, we work on the mitigation side. But the adaptation side, again, it's the ugly cousin, and we're just trying to get, because it's hard for people to plan. I mean, if you're in government, that's what government does. Government plans, but other people plan, but it doesn't get the impact. I guess, we're talking about barriers, and obviously a lot of it comes down to money, right? I'm reminded of your testimony when we talked about asthma, because our staff report, talked about an increase in asthma-related ER visits in California is up 17%. In Madera, it's up 108%. Kern or Merced, 88%. Kern, 66%. And Fresno, 44%. I mean, the fact that the ER-related asthma visits is up 18% in California should get us all nervous, right? I don't know ideas that you have on this, because I'm thinking back to that famous Pitney Bowes study. Pitney Bowes is a pretty good place to work. They got health care, and they were seeing all these ER incidences where people would go in to see the ER because of their asthma. And then, some guy that does the healthcare stuff interviewed folks and found out that what they weren't doing was getting their little emergency thing. They had $20. They got a good job, but they had $20, and they decided to buy milk for the kids or whatever they needed, and said, "I'm okay. I'm stronger than this. I'm not going to have an incident." And then the cost to Pitney Bowes was extreme because they visited the ER. So Pitney Bowes just gave out those little, what are they called, respirators? Inhalers. Just gave them to the employees. It was cheaper for them to give them the inhalers. And I don't know if the town of Madera can give inhalers to all the kids, but can you help me with some of these little, when things get acute? Because I'm concerned that we're trying to plan, we're trying to get better communications with the impacted communities and do what we can for environmental justice, but sometimes it's, like I said, that perfect storm is going to be created. And I'm not exactly sure where the state's emergency services should be directed, or should be, what I should be telling the Office of Planning and Research to be focusing their attention on.